was 2016 or 17, something like that. I had the chance to attend the conference first time. And this time we had traditional topics on cooperation, on mutual learning, on what's going on in your country, in our country, but geopolitics was not the first topic. It has totally changed. Now we are more or less framed by the geopolitical debate and the threats we see there. The war in Ukraine, the war from the United States against Iran. So we see a lot of uncertainty and ongoing uncertainty, high-level uncertainty, and this brings the topic of answers together from Canada and Germany to this topic on the table, and this is a really remarkable change.
You know, it's interesting. I think we both kind of came on board at the same time when you're thinking about when I started joining Atlantik-Brücke just a little over 10 years ago. And if I could say how it's evolved over time, it started with goodwill and friendship, cooperation. Now we're getting into real partnership because I think now, Michael, I'm really enthusiastic about the future because I feel we're talking about concrete projects between Canada and Germany. Like yesterday, we were talking with the battery plant, and they were talking about everything from Canadian critical minerals and lithium all the way to kind of a German battery technology, and how we're at the point now where we're talking about the practical steps of the partnership and what Canadian-German governments need to do, what Canadian-German companies need to do, and Canadian-German partners need to do in order to really strengthen the partnership.
And maybe one example was a debate we had at the beginning of our program about academic freedom. That means which way of cooperation we may have in the future from the Canadian and German university. Both have a very stable institutional setting. Academic freedom is given, but they have to answer to that. So, and the debate this morning made clear that we have the common challenge and we have maybe the common tradition, so we can answer also here in the same way.
But what I love about the program is that it's more than just what people think that they should know about. It's about introducing what they should know. And that's why I think for some of our members, they think academic freedom, why are we talking about academic freedom? But you know, when you were leading that panel and you're talking about the importance of academic freedom in terms of democracy, in terms of innovation, in terms of competitiveness, in terms of talent attraction, and how strong academic freedom in Canada and Germany helps us as middle powers compete against countries like China and the United States. I could see light bulbs. I could see light bulbs going off in the crowd for, you know, CEOs thinking, never thought of academic freedom like that. Maybe they should be interested in why we need a strong university system in both countries.
I think the debate about migration we have in all Western-style democracies, because we see this pressure for migration coming from the south, coming from other regions where are conflicts in, or they have the experience of war. So the question what to do on that. And the second is that we have a long-standing tradition in Canada as well as in Germany that an organized migration could help to strengthen the economic basis via integration in the labor market. Best way is coming to Germany and entering the university and then be part of the German labor market. So coming from that, I think that must be the perspective. The politicians are under pressure because the migration topic is so important from the far right. It's addressed and they have to be clear. We have some problems, but we have also big chances. And this big chances has to do with migration into our university system. And this also creates networks because the people from abroad may stay here, may go back or anywhere to another place. But this is a starting point of networks in these open-minded societies. So I think this is at the core, and we have to invest in our universities. And maybe if we have the vision that once Canada is a preferred partner of European Union, why should not the Canadian universities part of the Horizon 28 program?
Yep. Well, there you go. You know, the thing is, Michael, we agree 100%. You know, and I have full disclosure. I'm the chancellor of one of the major Canadian universities. I'd like to see the friendship, cooperation get to partnership. And you know, I know that you know, one of your good friends, PG Forrest. The reason you have that friendship is because of Canadian-German academic cooperation. And you know, you think that's brought us here in terms of Atlantik-Brücke. I worry about politicians taking complex public policy issues like immigration and distilling it to like 100 words. That's what I worry about. When really they should be talking about, immigration that fits the national strategy, immigration that helps with innovation, immigration that helps with talent attraction and talent management. And the thing is that one of the things that we've learned is that when the best and the brightest come to Germany, and you've done a study on this, and to Canada, they contribute, they become entrepreneurs, they become academics, and they make both countries stronger. But I don't think governments have done a good job at communicating, right, the real hard economic benefits on that front.
That's true. I think for a long time, it's your point, for a long time in the German debate, Canada was the big positive example, how to organize managed immigration due to the needs of the labor market, due to the potential the migrants may have. It took a long time for Germany because we started in the early 2000 years, changing some law, and most important in the year 2020, the new law on skilled labor migration to Germany. That's really very clear, very liberal, and I would say it's at the same level than Canada used to have it. So this was important to learn, but we should not forget that in Germany, immigration started in the year 1956, 11 years after the Second World War, with the first so-called guest worker agreement with Italy. There was a German labor office installed in Milan, and the Italian workers could apply for a job in Germany. And we always said for 20 or 30 years, that has nothing to do with migration because it's guest worker. So this was a wrong perception, and I think this has changed. I'm a little bit worried about the far-right policy, which is coming from AfD, and it has important in some local authorities. Maybe will enter responsibility in the German state government this year. So this is really a threat to the liberal society, to open migration, to manage migration, to an innovative system which is based on international networks and partnerships.
The one thing, the advantage that Canada has on the immigration front is that we have the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. So, it's not like people can get on a train, except if you're from the United States, but you can't walk to come in. Germany, the reality of Germany being at the heart of Europe means that realistically, it's kind of you're at the beginning, you're at the center of the hub where if someone decides to come to Germany, they can come to Germany. So we have that benefit. But what we have seen in Canada when it comes to our immigration policy, and when we ask Canadians, they overwhelmingly support immigration because most Canadians are immigrants, or their parents or grandparents were immigrants. So we have that as part of our culture. The challenge has been in the last number of years is that the previous government became a little more generous in allowing folks, foreign students, temporary foreign residents into the country at a pace that was much faster than before. And what we're having now in Canada is a bit of a reaction. I always think of it as it's like the technical correction went a little too far.
You're going
and
back.
Now it's going back. But for Canada, when it dials back immigration, it's still very generous. And the other thing that's been one of the strengths of the Canadian immigration system is that it's actually fairly strict. We are recruiting. I remember I'd be talking to some American colleagues, and they'd say, in these when Canada has a humanitarian effort, they go to these refugee camps and they skim off the top, doctors, lawyers, academics, right? Because they're looking for people with certain types of skills. And the thing is one of the reasons, in addition to why Canadians always have a positive impression of immigration, not just because of their personal story, but they know we need people with certain traits, right?
So we had a lot of hope because they started just before the new parliamentary season with the reform of the debt regulation, which was very clearly needed. It was needed for financing the infrastructure investment we should have, because we have a gap in infrastructure quality and we have a capacity gap in defense. So we had to make clear that we can finance it, whatever it takes, as Friedrich Merz said last year. And then they started, I think, in a very well way. They were very, very acceptable way to changing the taxation on companies, increasing depreciation for investment, and so on. So that was really the first right step. But then they struggled. They struggled for other topics, for bad management in parliament from the CDU fraction. So since then, they lost traction, I would say. And the topics are very clear. We should have a reform of the pension scheme, the pay-as-you-go pension scheme in an aging society. It's very simply what you have to do, because you have only 3 variables in the level of pension payments, the contribution payment, and the retirement age. That's you have to change, you have to address. The second is healthcare. It's very expensive in Germany. We pay a lot, not so efficient, and we can learn a lot from Canada and some other countries. The same is true for the elderly care. So all this is more or less transparent, the need for action and the way to act. The other way is reforming the labor market and reducing the tax burden, and then attack bureaucracy. This last point, I'm a bit more optimistic, because first time we have a Ministry on Digital Affairs and State Reform,
Right.
State modernization, better to say. And I think that's really the chance to have a comprehensive and consistent agenda for not only reducing bureaucracy, but redesigning bureaucracy, redesigning the procedures. 2 weeks ago, last week, the German Parliament approved a law in speeding up procedures for procurement. That's a very important step. That's a little bit behind the curtain. For the public, even more is important. There's a lot of struggle, a lot of conflict in government, and they have to manage it.
You know, what's interesting about Michael, what you just said, is that your diagnosis of what's happening in Germany applies absolutely perfectly also to Canada. We're worried about an aging population. We're worried about how we're going to be delivering healthcare. We're worried about competitiveness, tax reform, all those things. People are worried about the cost of energy. Even though we are energy rich, they're worried about the cost of energy and the cost of housing and inflation. The one difference I'd like to say, even though the conditions are very similar in both countries, is because in Canada, there's a perception of the external threat, I'd like to say, Donald Trump. Donald Trump saying that Canada should be the 51st state. Donald Trump saying that Canada is not a trustable ally, that we're not nice. Could you imagine anyone saying Canadians are not nice people? But anyways, he says that. No. But I think one of the differences politically when we look at the performance of both governments is that Mark Carney has benefited from having this external threat that has really rallied Canadians. So Mark Carney is the Liberal Prime Minister, but there are conservatives that might vote conservative but think he's the best person to deal with Donald Trump, and the same thing with New Democrats and across all the parties. And you know, the thing is what it's allowed is it's given him a significant amount of political license to act, right? So, you know, in a way, Germany needs more of an external threat to mobilize.
We have an external threat, and that's Russia.
Yes.
The war in Ukraine and the threat which is coming from the Russian Federation, that's really a severe one. I would say the difference is in the end that after 1 year, Merkel still has high approval rates.
Very high.
Very high. And Friedrich Merz has the lowest approval rates ever. Yeah. So this is not why the people don't see the need to act, don't see the threat. They see that the politics in practice is not working. Yeah. That they're not delivering. They want to have a different style. They want to have a cooperative style in government. And the both parties, especially the Social Democrats, are working against their own government members.
Yeah, but that probably also explains one difference in Canada is why there is not really a very right-wing populist movement.
Because the people are not disappointed. They are stick to the government.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a big advantage. We would pray that we will have it again in Germany.